welcome viewers to the Personal Injury Law Show. This is a law show that's got everything to do with personal injury law today. I'm John Karantzis, your host tonight. With me I have Nadine Hanna. Nadine, how are you?
Hi John, hi viewers.
And Don Maffia.
G'day John, g'day viewers. Now, John, this is our 14th season.
14th season, fantastic.
And we should say Tony's on a well-deserved break. He should be back with us in a couple of weeks.
Exactly.
But today, John, we've got a great show. We're talking about asylum seekers, and we have a special guest, John.
Yes, Professor Zifcak from the Australian Catholic University, former head of Liability Victoria. He'll be joining us tonight to talk about asylum seekers and the Australian policies. However, before that, Don, we'll get into what's in the news.
Let's get into what's in the news, John. There's a first case, John, there about a judge aborts a trial after juror takes a nap.
Oh, Don, here we go again.
Here we go again.
Now, it's a Supreme Court murder trial. The jury has just been impanelled. Everything started. Judge Philip Priest, very eminent judge, is giving his opening address, basically explaining to the jurors what's happening, how this trial is going to go. A juror falls asleep.
Well, I know. I think they even suspected that he heard a snore as well.
There was a snore
during the opening address.
During the opening address. Now, my concern here, Don, is the opening address usually could be an hour.
Yes.
So for 1 whole hour, the judge is giving his opening address. All the barristers sitting there, and
Don't say anything.
they don't say anything.
But John, it's 12 jurors. Okay, so the judge is giving his open address. The judge even says, I saw him close his eyes, but I thought he was just deep in thought.
And he was concentrating.
So for the whole address, which an hour or so, he was sleeping. So that is, unfortunately for the trial, they had to discharge the jury and then impanel a new jury.
And basically, nearly a whole day of a court proceeding is lost.
Yeah.
Now, even though it's slightly amusing, at the same time, we're talking about resources of the court system, which is not finite. This costs thousands and thousands of dollars in wasted taxpayers' money. That's the problem, isn't it, Dom?
That's right. And furthermore, the jury does not know, believe it or not, why they were discharged. They were never told.
That's the usual. That's the usual course.
So discharge go.
Viewers will because of this particular case, and I think we'll come back to doing a whole episode on jury trial. So I think it's very interesting, and there's a lot of interest out there as to how it relates to the Australian public. But next case, a pram set afire and fruit thrown at an Iranian couple. What's going on here, Don?
Yeah, appears to be some racist attacks. There's a few mentioned in this article, but this one in particular was a person, they're moving house, and for some reason they were using a pram to help them move their stuff, and they left it. Then someone's come along, burnt it, and threw the pram at them. And there's a few of these spates of attacks on these people who are asylum seekers. Nadine, I'm not sure whether this new policy, which we'll be talking about today with the professor, is helping these sort of minimising these attacks. It just seems like these, unfortunately, racist attacks are happening more and more.
It's not good. We don't want to.
That's right. It seems like it's a bit more prevalent in such an unfortunate way, Don.
And it just attempts to be to this class of people, the asylum seekers.
Yeah.
No, it's not good. We don't want to see racism like this in Australia.
No.
That's the bad old days. We don't want to see it. But slipping and sliding, Nadine, what's going on here?
Well, it seems like there's quite a considerable amount of commuters that have been slipping and sliding on railway tracks and the V lines and the concourses, John, and sustaining quite significant injuries during this process of disembarking and unlighting.
Being on the platforms.
That's
John,
right.
the figures, 550 incidents in 2012-2013 year. So that's a financial year, I suspect, compared to 285 incidences on platforms, on train stations, at train stations in the year before. So there's an increase. There's a trend of ongoing problems. And this is, I believe, slips, falls, people running for the train, slipping over. You can see they've got a picture here from Flinders Street showing that absolutely packed as to people. It's just overcapacity, and unfortunately a lot of incidents are happening.
Well, in Flinders Street train station, 132 people have suffered these type of injuries.
That's right.
Now, they've all got claims, don't they, Don?
Well, they do. Well, it depends on how they fell, John. If it involved, let's say, a person got on the train and the train moved or the door closed on them, they might give rise to a claim with a transport accident if it's an incident directly caused by the driving of the train. But if they've slipped over water, over something, over a hazard on the floor, they've got their own public liability or occupiers liability claim.
Parliament Station, 84. Southern Cross Station, 53 injuries.
And it's interesting actually as well that they are mentioning here that if you're intending to catch the train, that you should allow yourself enough time to be able to embark on these vehicles before, you know, to ensure to prevent a slipping accident. But do you think, Don, that would ever make a difference between a running if there was a hazard on these types of platforms?
Look, I think for them, if they were running, I guess your chances or your risks are a little bit higher because I guess you're intending to do one thing and that's embark on the train, or so get onto the train. So your mind is, I'm going to run, I'm going to get there. So of course it gives rise to it.
Wait a minute.
Having said that,
the Melbourne pastime is you have to leave as late as possible to get to the train. Yeah, and you have to run all the way. You have to cross that red light and just run.
yeah. But John, I see what you say. There's a lot of look. Also, we're looking at a train station. We particularly look at Flinders Street Station. Very old. It is over capacity in terms of the amount of people that are on there. I mean, the figures are increasing because there are a lot more commuters on the train.
All right. So, look, viewers out there, please, the moral of the story is take care when you're catching the train. Otherwise, you will be injured.
Well, that's right. And we've seen some great campaigns as well. There's a new campaign, which has been around for a while, where on trams, and the slogan of the trams, we should do on a show one day, John, is that there's many different ways to die.
Oh, all right.
And it's a great slogan. So, look, very interesting. Look, good on the train stations and all that and the road safety campaigns.
Don, Mother Sue's, she was left sterile after an operation.
Yeah, now this is
a shocking story.
Look, time and time again, John, we hear this. We had a mother who doesn't speak English, by the way, who went to a doctor, had some problems. The doctor said, you need your tubes tied, or else if you have a baby, you're going to bleed to death. Essentially, that's what she understood, which was entirely incorrect advice. So she's had a tube tied, can never have baby again, and now she's found out she never needed that operation. So they've brought a claim, or they've sued the hospital for
medical negligence.
Mm-hmm. And she did not know. And the thing is this, she could not speak English.
We'll keep you updated, viewers, in regards to that very dreadful and tragic story. Viewers, after the break, we'll have Professor Zifcak on to talk to us and to tell us all about asylum seekers and the refugee policies and what's going on in Australia. In the meantime, we want to hear your feedback via Facebook or Twitter about these stories and more. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. We have Professor Zifcak with us tonight to talk about asylum seekers and the Australian government policies regarding asylum seekers. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Now, Professor, this is a major issue in Australian life at the moment, isn't it? We've got the Labor government that has brought in the PNG solution. We've got the Liberal opposition party saying not enough is being done. Professor, what's going on here?
Well, I think that we've got, as everyone knows, a situation where for the last year or so, there has been an increasing number of people arriving in Australia, not just by boat, but also on planes. And when they get here, they seek asylum in Australia. And their argument is that they were persecuted in their home countries, they had to flee their own countries, and consequently, under international law, they say they have an entitlement to have a fair hearing here to determine whether they are genuine refugees, and if they're genuine refugees, to be resettled whether here or in an agreeable third country.
Professor, under the Australian the conventions that Australia has signed to, we're obliged to take in asylum seekers, aren't we?
We've signed the International Refugee Convention, and we signed that very early on. This is a convention that has applied to refugees ever since 1951. Under the terms of the convention, if a person arrives in a country without a visa, but claims asylum on the grounds that they're fleeing persecution, torture, arbitrary detention, racial discrimination, etc. in their home country, then the country receiving them has an international obligation to hear their claim for refugee status.
Don, we've got the PNG solution, the Rudd government PNG solution.
Yep.
What's that all about?
Well, everyone would have seen those ads in the papers and in the TV as well, which pretty much says if you come by boat, now this is to clarify, they're not making an issue about people come by plane, John. So you come by plane asylum seeker, you're in a different kettle of fish there, you're in a different sector. But if you come by boat, you'll be put back on another boat or plane and sent to Papua New Guinea, and you'll never get to settle in Australia ever. That's their policy. So don't come here because you'll never settle in Australia.
So, and these television ads, which you and I pay for, the Australian
Yes.
taxpayer,
Yeah, newspaper articles.
Part of it's saying that the guarantee given by the people smuggler is no longer valid.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Yes, for some reason they've gone, it's boat people, it's people smugglers, we're going to target that. And we assume, John, that these people smugglers are reading our papers overseas
Over
and watching our TV.
in Indonesia.
So I'm sure it's really getting there and
Well, if
get to its target audience.
If the Australian government's got an issue with the people smugglers, why don't they target them in Indonesia?
Well, Professor, what do you think?
Well, I think that's a really good point, actually.
I mean, is this too logical, Professor? It's too logical for the Australian government?
No, this is a really good point. And the reason it's a good point is that the main argument that's being put in favour of the current policies is that it's designed to stop people hopping on boats.
Yes.
Now, the problem is that the PNG solution and the Nauru solution are founded on the assumption that people will arrive by boat. And it's only then that they will be sent to Nauru or Papua New Guinea. If you really want to stop people hopping on boats, you've got to stop that happening in Indonesia or the other countries from where they're arriving. So really, in my view, the Australian government should have been negotiating patiently, firmly and with appropriate financial incentives for getting the people who plan to come here to be processed fairly and in accordance with human rights in Indonesia. And then if a person's found to be a genuine refugee and for that reason found to be a person who has been fleeing from persecution, could be genocide, could be torture, could be arbitrary detention, could be war crimes, whatever. If they're genuinely fleeing, then Australia, as a wealthy nation in the Asian region, should be taking its fair share of genuine refugees.
Professor, desperate people that are fleeing either their economic circumstances, religious or political persecution, have been arriving on boat to Australia for literally many, many years. In the 70s, people from Vietnam were coming.
Yep.
They were desperate.
Yep.
They were fleeing a war-torn country. Australia didn't say no to them.
No, that's true.
Why are we saying no to people now?
Look, I think probably for a couple of reasons. The refugee problem globally now is massive.
Yes.
Let me just give you an indication. Latest UN figures suggest that there are something like 12 million refugees in the world at the moment, and that is not even to count the 25 million people who are displaced within their own country. So we've got a massive problem. The number of people that the UN manages to process every year around the world is 80,000. So
what happens?
This means
What happens
essentially,
to all these people?
Well,
End up in jail, John.
well, just to finish that point, that means that even if we cut the refugee problem off now and just process the people that are in line to be processed, it would take 130 years. Okay?
Well,
130 years
All right.
to process the existing global problem, and that's why this argument about there's an orderly queue out there and people are just waiting patiently for their line to come to Australia is an absolute nonsense argument.
Well, Australians don't like, quotation mark, queue jumpers,
Yeah.
Professor.
Yeah.
But in essence, that doesn't really exist, does it?
It doesn't exist because you've got such a massive problem. As you know, I do some work in Thailand on the Thai-Burma border,
Yes.
teaching young refugee students from the camps up there. None of my students, when I was there a month ago, had been in refugee camp for less than 7 years. 3 of them had been there for 25 years. And the reason they're there is because the Thai government has said we're not processing people anymore. So they are sitting in the camps and they've got no prospect in any foreseeable future of getting out of camp.
And they will be there for literally half their life.
Well, some of them have already been there for a third of their life.
So, Professor, you're saying if you look at notorious criminals, they might get a lesser sentence in jail time than what these people spend in detention camps or those sort of camps?
Absolutely the case. I had some refugee students this time around. They were all 3 of them were around 28, 29. They'd been in camp since they were 4.
Professor, we'll take a short break, viewers. After the break, we'll get back to some court cases regarding asylum seekers. Welcome back, viewers. We're talking about the asylum seekers and the plight that they're in. Professor, economic refugees and asylum seekers, tell us a little bit about them.
Well, the situation under the International Refugee Convention is that there's only one situation in which you can claim to be a genuine refugee, and that is if you're fleeing persecution. So if you're running from torture, cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment, or political persecution, or the possibility of being detained for a long period of time in prison for criticising a government, for example, and you flee the country, you will be classed as a refugee if you can make out that persecution claim. But the International Refugee Convention doesn't cover what we call economic migrants. Economic migrants are people who may well have been subject to poverty and disadvantage and even starvation in their own countries, but they still don't fall within the scope of the International Refugee Convention. So we don't owe them the same obligations as we do to people who are fleeing persecution.
So they're not true asylum seekers?
Well, they may be seeking asylum, but they're not refugees.
They're not refugees. Unfortunately, Professor, there is a perception in the Australian public that a lot of these boat people coming to Australia are economic refugees.
Well, there is a perception, but it's not true, despite what the Foreign Minister said recently about this issue. Let me take one example. Many people will remember the Tampa incident in 2001.
Oh, yes.
The Tampa had 450 people on it, and they were heading for Australia to seek asylum here. We sent them away, they came back again, they eventually were processed elsewhere, but in the final analysis, 90% of the people on the Tampa were found to be genuine refugees, 90%. So if you say to me, well, there might be 10% of people who are economic migrants and 90% who are genuine refugees, I'd agree with you. But if you're saying that most of the people who come here by boat are seeking a better standard of living, I think, to be honest, that's factually completely incorrect.
But Professor, this policy that's been introduced by the government just says if you come by boat, they're not even considering that. They're just saying if you come by boat, regardless of your situation, true asylum not, you're going to PNG, you'll never come here again.
That's right.
So it sounds like they haven't really got into that much thought or actually even just researched it all. Now, Professor, the other thing, we keep referring to 1951 Convention.
Yes.
So Australia signed up earlier on, I think in the 1960s they signed.
Yes.
They want to be part of the international community, that's why we signed these conventions.
Yep.
But yet we have a policy that's trying to be a deterrent for boat people coming to Australia,
Yep.
so which contravenes every section of this convention. But it's not solving and will not solve the situation of asylum seekers in the sense that, well, if they're not coming to Australia, they'll try to go somewhere else. There's still asylums, regardless if they're trying to come to Australia or not. But also, trying to be part of the international community, Professor, shouldn't we just do our fair share and help out?
Well, yes, I think we should. The International Refugee Convention imposes obligations on Australia, which Australia has voluntarily assumed, to hear the cases of people who come here saying they had to flee their own country to save their own lives or their own physical beings. And there have been statements by the government and the opposition that all of these new policies that have come out in the last 6 weeks or so are compliant with Australia's convention obligations, but they clearly aren't. The convention requires a country like Australia, if a person lands here saying, I'm a genuine refugee, requires Australia to hear their case and to provide them with appropriate legal representation and to establish a fair process of judicial review and so on. But both the policies of the government and the opposition are in effect entirely repudiating the International Refugee Convention and consequently our humanitarian obligations, because what we're saying is, if you land here, we're not going to process you at all. We're going to dump you on boats and we're going to send you to poverty-stricken, violent and in every other way profoundly disadvantaged countries, and you're going to be processed in accordance with the laws of those countries. So Australia's obligation is to provide a fair hearing to people who come here and seek to be refugees. The new policies say we're providing no hearing for these people, whatever, we're shipping them off to PNG, Nauru and any other country.
To a tent city in the PNG.
And in Nauru, as it
Now,
happens.
there's one step further from that now, Don, isn't there?
Well-
What is the legal liability of the Commonwealth of Australia in regards to any asylum seeker that is injured in the PNG tent city?
They have a duty to look after, your assumed duty, because they're paying for it. You
Well,
would think.
there's a memorandum of understanding between the Commonwealth of Australia and the PNG government.
Yep, so
That
assumed
we
duty.
literally, Commonwealth pays for everything.
So look after their safety. So which is interesting. So we won't give them a fair hearing to see if they're true asylum seekers. But if they get injured, sustain psychological, physical injury, they will get a fair hearing where they sue the government for their failure to look after their safety.
The case law...
So that doesn't balance out, does it?
The case law in Australia is clear, isn't it, Don? That
It's a
if an
duty.
asylum seeker is injured in an Australian facility
Yep.
and the Commonwealth has breached, or whoever has breached the duty of care, then the Commonwealth or whoever is liable literally to pay damages, correct?
That's correct. So
Now,
there's been
by
a few cases, John, that we spoke about last time
Yes.
on this issue, each of which showed psychological injury, a lot of psychological and physical injuries, abuse, whatever happened in there, and they have a right to sue the government for the failure to look after their safety.
and receive damages, sometimes in the form of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, by extension, security guards securing these facilities also have a claim, don't they, Don?
That's correct. So people who work for the government or those independent private security companies sustain injuries. Again, physically, psychological. Psychological, Professor, appears to be a huge component to these type of claims. And you might have seen that, having worked so closely with these refugees as well.
Yep.
And they're just claims that are being brought to the court and suing the government for damages.
Now, we've got the classic concepts of the injured party has to show that there's been a breach of duty.
That's correct.
And that breach of duty has caused some form of harm. Usually either it's a psychological or it's a physical harm, and therefore damages arise.
But Joan, the problem is, if they get injured in Papua New Guinea, the law of Papua New Guinea applies. And Professor, do we have any idea of what the law is in PNG?
Well, one of the great problems with the PNG solution is that even though PNG is a country that's signed up to the International Refugee Convention, it does not still have an effective legal framework within which to process people. and it doesn't have an effective legal framework within which personal injury claims of the kind that you're talking about might be pursued. So that's another way in which Australia is simply contracting out its legal duties to another country, but to countries that simply don't possess the legal systems or skills to do that properly.
Professor, thank you for coming on this evening to give us all an insight into asylum seekers and their plight. Viewers, again, we welcome your feedback. We want to hear your feedback on Facebook and Twitter, particularly in regards to your previous episode with surveillance, Professor. We had a lot of feedback about that and the unfair and sneaky practices by some organisations surveying people. Don, thank you for joining us, and viewers, stay safe.